Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of ClueCon Weekly. I am your host, Jon Gray, and today we're going to take a step back and look at the messy but beautiful journey of telecom over the 21st century by diving into the career journey of one of VoIP's most seasoned veterans, Alex Balashov, Principal Consultant at Every Systems. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me again.
Yeah, definitely. Well, for those of us who have yet to talk to you or meet you, can you give us a little background on what you're doing now and how this journey kind of began for you in telecom?
Sure. So I primarily do SIP service delivery platform engineering work, mostly around Kamailio, and I've been substantially in that business since late 2000s, about the Great Recession era, and sort of speed ran my way into that from prior career track. But I'm actually one of the few people in telecom who, or really in tech, who can say that I'm doing substantially the same thing that I was doing 20 years ago. It's obviously not exactly the same. It's undergone the usual renovations. You know how 20 years feels like 5 years of experience 4 times. Sometimes that all has happened to me too. But still, there's a remarkable continuity between what I was doing in 2006, 2007, and what I'm doing right now in 2025. It's kind of shocking. Maybe it's built to last, maybe it's not, but I'm still here. And as far as how I got started, well, you can date back the incipient parts of anything to an arbitrary date, I guess. For me, uh, the proximate point of origin for getting into telecom and telephony per se was my first job, my first and third job at a local internet service provider here in Athens, Georgia, where I live. Um, that got me interested in, uh, well, we weren't really a network build out operator. We, like many small independent ISPs of the time, were in a post Telecom Reform Act of '96 moment where we were reselling DSL loops and T1 circuits from the local ILEC, from the local telco. And I naturally got very interested in how this worked. Both there was a practical motive to be better at my job, troubleshooting it with Bell South. There was also a strong, background interest in networking and a whole predilection for IT and networking from my childhood. But I got more interested in how this stuff worked, how these T1 circuits that we have coming in actually worked, how all these ADSL aggregation circuits, at first ATM, later IP, that were coming in actually worked. And that naturally led me down a path where I converged with the history of the Bell system and voice and how digital trunking came about and the overall architecture of the PSTN. And that made me more interested in the old school telco world and ISDN and SS7. And I gradually changed the arc of my subsequent career to match that and went to go work in the carrier space for a little while. And I would say that's how I ended up here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Nice. How did tinkering kind of play a role or being a hobbyist in what it is that you're doing today? Do you find that some of those skill sets have evolved, or have you have some skills based upon that?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, really, it all goes back to how I grew up. I'm a Soviet immigrant, but I came here when I was 6, and my parents were graduate students at the University of Notre Dame in northern Indiana. It's about 2 hours
Mm-hmm.
east of Chicago, for those who don't know. And that's where I spent at least the first half of my childhood. And we were living on a small graduate student stipend and didn't have a lot of money, didn't really have any serious computer hardware at home, but what I did have was an environment, a social milieu of PhD candidates in our graduate student housing at a kind of unique moment. We had lots of different nationalities there. I was in a close to a very, very wealthy private university, which had a lot of hardware and a lot of opportunities for a little munchkin to tinker. And so, I was actually, for being 39 years old, I was on the web in 1994. Which is kind of hilarious. But my first
Mm-hmm.
browse, I ask people somewhat older than myself sometimes, what was your first browser? And we both say Netscape Navigator 1.1N or Mosaic. I'm from that era.
Yeah.
I caught the very tail end of it. And that was just because I had a very precocious exposure to this stuff at a time when the commercial internet and the World Wide Web were just kind of in their primordial stage. And that was because I had the good fortune to be in this university environment. And, you know, that also instilled a very strong appreciation for the importance of role models and mentorship for me because I was very lucky to be exposed to people that I wanted to emulate. I mean, like I said, we didn't have a lot of computer hardware at home almost for pretty much until maybe 6th or 7th grade. All my internet access was at the university library or some computer labs I wasn't necessarily supposed to be in. And I had certain enablers and people whom I met along the way in that particular environment who really nurtured my interest and helped me with that, and I'm eternally in their debt. And it just goes to show, I had friends who came from more conventional middle class families, who had more hardware, who had Pentium 260s when I had a 386, who had internet at home, and they just kind of became gamers or tinkerers, but didn't really go anywhere with an interest in, say, software or taking their computer apart and learning more about it. And it made me appreciate how important it is to be surrounded by the right kind of people. Because I
Hmm.
could have very easily gone down that kind of path too. So the most important thing that I learned in childhood is that it's not necessarily about what resources you're given, what hardware you have, what you have. It's more about whether you have access to the right environmental inputs. And so I kind of got my start in Notre Dame as a 9, 10-year-old munchkin sitting in Spark workstation labs, getting my first taste of Solaris, of Linux. Later, some graduate students took me under their wing, and I can think of one in particular to whom I'm internally indebted, and gave me opportunities to play with Unix, nurture my interest in C code, and kind of give me a good foundation for getting interested in systems programming, which I really later after we moved away to other parts of the US, I got to pursue on my own and found like-minded collaborators online and people to co-compete with and like-minded adolescents and teenagers who were all staying up into the wee hours and getting bleary-eyed with kernel device drivers and things like that. I don't know that I could have gone there without being vectored down that path by the right kind of people. So there was a tinkering mindset from very early on, and I, I had resources, at least in terms of human capital, readily at hand to answer a lot of my questions and further indulge my curiosity, even if I didn't necessarily have stuff.
No, that's really interesting. Especially the just concept of community is really very prominent here in the free switch community, ClueCon. But we often overlook kind of the importance of mentorship and really the, the really
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, I was a kid. I wanted to play with stuff. I think if you just left me in my own devices, I might have been a precocious kid with academic habits of mind inherited from that kind of family, but I was still a
mhm,
kid. I actually got a lot out of the fact that I wanted to be like the people around me, the people I saw who were working and doing their graduate theses in, various research labs in the computer science and engineering department. I wanted to write code like them. I even acquired some
mhm.
quirky habits of theirs, whether it's putting the metal letter opener on top of the IBM Model M keyboard. I wanted to be like them in every way. I wanted to do the things they do, run the window managers they run, use the FVWM config they have. I wanted to write code like they do, format it like they do, use the tools they
Yeah.
do. And until you have enough independent judgment and aesthetics to run with that on your own, having people around you who you want to be like is so influential and so determinative. And I think that just played a huge role in how I came up. And I don't know where I would have ended up without them or what my relationship to this field would be. But it really helped steer me in a productive direction and not just play.
Hmm. So, in kind of learning those internet basics, from at such a high level, what are some of the benefits that you've seen bleeding into software development or telecom? Like, how has that kind of played a role, specifically on like the internet background side, and how it is
Mhm.
that you were tinkering kind of back then? Like, where do you kind of find a line to kind of trace or travel between that?
Well, there was always an interest in networking. I think that's the through line. I was very interested in making stuff talk to other stuff, whether it's on a software level or just in networks and how they work. I was just inordinately fascinated. Maybe it's because I got to be a part of the early internet even as a very young child. in a kind of precocious way, but I was very, very interested in networking. And what I think I didn't know at the beginning of my career as I got to be an adult is that, at least at that time in the mid 2000s, corporate America made a distinction between kind of your operations track and your development track. I had a development background growing up, but I kind of tracked myself into operations and network engineering for a while because all I had ever done was work for small companies where, people did both. And but as that relates to your question, I think really y- there's a certain appetite for learning more about telephony, the PSTN, the global addressability of the PSTN, the global routing of the PSTN, the global routing of IP, how the internet is glued together, how it works. That comes from that basic instinct that no computer is an island and that we're all connected, and you can send a packet from a workstation here and it'll get to a workstation there, and how does that work? That I think I always had from a young age, precisely because I was in an academic environment where that was being developed in a way that outran what was going on in the sort of the median pace of technology adoption in business or among consumers. So, for example, at Notre Dame, even in the mid and late 90s, they had a single sign-on system. They participated in AFS, as did a number of governmental and many governmental and academic institutions, where of course, the folks who had been plugged into ARPANET since the 70s, 80s. And I think approaching computing from that perspective early on gave me a very networked view of the world. It wasn't about what I can do on my computer. It was about the internet and my computer. I almost had a, a I guess a slightly prescient preview of the idea of a thin client in a certain sense.
Hmm. No, I like that analogy, especially, a computer not being on an island and kind of being able to glue not only computers or applications together, but kind of modes of telecom is really kind of prominent in what we're seeing now. I think of just kind of our mission at SignalWire and FreeSwitch is to basically make telecom accessible for everybody, no matter what platform it is that they are coming in from. Whether you're a SIP endpoint, a PSTN line, a conference like we're in right now, or a dial script, being able to link and piece all those pieces together is kind of like
Yeah,
a long
exactly.
theory.
Middleware, mixing and matching, and
Hmm.
different adaptation layers between different kinds of, signaling and bearer technologies. That really speaks to me in a way that I can almost trace back to interests I even had as a teenager.
Hmm. Well, in terms of like some of the telecom fundamentals that people have to learn, and maybe that we saw being taught before, do you kind of view this as kind of like a lost art of learning and a way of thinking? Starting from the basics and tinkering, having to go through G711, or seeing the emergence of asterisk and free switch. Do you see
Yeah.
that the new wave of telecom is kind of losing that novelty that was once there?
Yeah, it's so funny, there's so many things to say on that topic.
Hmm.
I think uh when you've been around even as long as I have, and I can hardly claim to be an old timer, but when you've been around as long as I have, you've been around long enough that you've seen enough things come and go, that and a lot of old is new again, and a lot of, this whole sort of sizzling samsara of things being reinvented, that after a while you can't help but be a little bit exhausted and have some prejudice about them. And I think maybe that's the essential conservatizing instinct that happens as you get older. But no, I don't think I'm yet at the phase where I'm just griping about how the kids these days don't understand ENM wink anymore or something.
Hmm.
Although I know many people in telephony who do. There is a divide, that a sociological divide in our community between people who worked in the glorious TDM days and people who have no comprehension of it whatsoever, with a relatively small slither of people who are truly fluent and really traffic comfortably in both. And I do feel for the older guys who miss the days of, truly five nines telecom. I mean, I often joke that if all of my customers had done TDM until the late 2010s, I wouldn't have a job.
Hmm.
Um, but the other angle on that question is actually how I got into telephony per se. I mentioned the ISP background. So
Yeah.
we had an office building with like a Lucent DDM 2000 OC3 or OC12 MUX that had circuits broken out of it. It was upgraded to, support a lot of the aggregation that we were doing as an ISP customer of Bell South. And I remember watching some of the unionized Bell South people come and occasionally work on it with, their plugging into the 9-pin craft port and looking at the TL1 magic they do. As an 18, 19-year-old sysadmin, I had a lot of raw skills, but not a lot of ability to orient myself in this space. I didn't have a lot of perspective. And this was certainly more sophisticated and industrial than anything I had ever seen as a consumer. And I thought they were just walking demigods. I didn't realize that that type of work is actually a fading skill set and is in the overall totem pole of value creation. No disrespect to them, it's thought of as kind of routine or maybe blue collar in a certain sense. I thought that's where the real money is. That's where the real engineering magic is. So when I first, in the mid 2000s, I started getting interested in this stuff. Right about at that time was the cultural moment when open source VoIP, asterisk, free switch, etc., burst onto the scene and made it possible to run PBXs on commodity hardware for the first time. And a lot of people were very, very excited about that. They were very jazzed about that. It was a very exciting moment for reinvention, and it also provided a point of entry for people like me to get into telecom, where before it was a pretty opaque space consisting mostly of proprietary gray beige boxes, by your well-known PBX vendors and, 5Es and DMSs and the like. Uh, but my response to it, as someone who was very impressed with all of this telephony and TDM stuff, was actually to say, this SIP stuff seems kind of hokey. Maybe it'll catch on in the PBX world.
Hmm.
But
Maybe it'll
SS7
be
and
trendy.
ISDN is where it's at.
Hmm.
So my subsequent career choices were I ended up working at a CLEC in Atlanta for a while, doing this, doing that. And as I went to those various jobs, I really was very heavy on the uptake. I remember one of my first breakthrough opportunities was to play with the Cisco AS5300, later a 5400, played with a lot of cross connect equipment and ISDN to SIP conversion equipment. And while I recognized that there has to be some sort of grassroots demand for the SIP end of that box, it was really the TDM side that interested me. And so I caught one of these branches and swung from it for a while just as that stuff was on its way out. And I thought, no, this is truly rarefied, specialized expertise. I saw a lot of relatively commoditized or commonplace IT skill sets around me, and I thought, TDM telephony. Now that's serious business. And so I invested myself in that for a while, and then, of course, in 2009, 2010, there was kind of another cultural moment or shift where I really had to eat my words, and SIP trunking was becoming over the public IP backbone was becoming viable for the first time in any sense, and it would be a few years before it really gained critical mass. At that time, the folk wisdom was still that the public IP backbone is where voice quality goes to die or something. But by 2014, you wouldn't be saying that anymore. And so, to bring it back to your question, I found that there was a lot of use in having the old school, if you like, telephony background, such as I was able to pick it up in those years, and then bring that back to the emergent VoIP field, because much of what I do is really a kind of arbitrage. In one sense, it's arbitrage between an academic background and how it can be monetized in the private sector in some ways, but the other form of arbitrage is really in taking maybe not extraordinarily complicated, but certainly specialized uh, telephony and telecom knowledge and
Hmm.
exposing it to a more traditional IT audience. Taking into account the peculiarities of VoIP and the PSTN and you know uh, the 100 packets per second per call reality,
Exactly.
QoS realities of our world, and so on. And so I got really, really interested in combining these worlds as best as I could. And I think just now we're hitting the point where much of the PSTN is actually, becoming IP peered. But for I was on record as late as 2015 saying, that doesn't seem to be happening yet. Can't tell you when it'll happen. I think I gave a
Hmm.
presentation to that effect. So it's funny how that works.
Yeah, the world is always evolving in that regard. Do you recall like your first taste of VoIP or free switch kind of magic? Like when you were first looking at it and you're like, oh my gosh, this is kind of revolutionary and changes the way that I view not only telephony, but maybe the internet too, or technical capabilities at
Yeah,
all.
yeah. I had a Snom 190 phone, and I went to a 24-hour
Uh-huh.
coffee shop here in Athens where cut a lot of my teeth on this stuff. I was the guy who's there at the 3 a.m. graveyard shift, hanging out with a very motley cast of characters. And one day I
Yeah.
brought in a Snom 190, if you remember those very, very thin Gnome phones.
Mm-hmm.
I think I grabbed it from work or something. And I had a ThinkPad, and I connected it to the Ethernet port and bridged the phone onto the coffee shop Wi-Fi. And at home, I had an open source VoIP box with an FXS card connected to my landline. And I called a Manhattan DID from my flip phone, and my Gnome phone in the coffee shop rang. And I forget who I was trying to impress with this, and I don't think it really clicked for it's a phone.
Uh-huh.
I don't think it really clicked for them what exactly was happening here, but that was that was one of those eureka moments where I realized that we're really in a different world now. I was very accustomed to thinking of uh, calling as deeply terrestrial, almost hyper literal, ontologically speaking thing, and now
Yeah.
suddenly my my telephony is coming to me from my home landline over the wire.
Yeah. No, it's incredible how many things we take for granted when you do something incredible like that and you're like trying to impress and they're like, yeah, you made a phone ring. And you're like, no, you don't understand.
But it's
This
it's
is
it's the modalities, it's the how I made the phone ring.
yeah,
That's that's
exactly.
truly that's truly important here. And I had plenty of missteps along the way. I mean, I remember in one memorable instance, somebody at work was in this moment around 2004, 2005, was working on a homespun. It was an asterisk distribution, a hosted PBX product. Well, they were working. No, I think what they were working on was a on-premise CD-based distro, actually, now that I think about it. And they had a prototype box for this, and the project had been shelved. There were too many other priorities. We were a five-person company. It was just sitting there collecting dust in the machine room. So I grabbed it, wiped it, installed Debian on it, and did my own asterisk thing, or maybe it was free switch. I don't remember at that point. But I ended up throwing away months and months of work. There was no backup.
Mm,
Needless to say, my immediate supervisor was not very pleased.
yeah, they tend to get that way sometimes.
So they definitely hit some highs and hit some lows.
Yeah, definitely. Well, in kind of the light of looking back, would do you feel like you would still choose telecom today, or what would you kind of do differently in today's landscape in terms of not only career choice, but like if you were to kind of dig further into telecom today, how would that kind of look like, and how would that be different than dealing
You
with
mean
phones
you
and
mean if I
coffee
was
shops
starting
at
out
3 a.m.?
today?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I really worry for the folks starting out today, not because they didn't walk uphill both ways in the snow like I did, but I think this whole moment of remote work and just the discombobulation of the human networks and human factors that make kind of atmospheric learning possible have really decomposed after the pandemic. So I guess what I say here applies to just about any technical and maybe even large classes of white collar work and isn't very telecom specific as an answer. But a lot of what I learned about you got to understand when I came into the ISP job, I had no social knowledge of business. I came from a humanities family. I was a philosophy major for 3 years at UGA until I dropped out. I think came in as a poli sci major. I had no intention of making a tech career
Hmm.
uh, at that time, at least when I came into university. And I just some basic stuff that I think would be obvious to like an American kid that ran a lemonade stand just wasn't obvious to me. My first summer working there, it really clicked for me that you can actually charge consulting time even if you didn't solve the problem, and just working on it is value creation. I was like, what? Just
Yeah.
basic stuff that. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot on the commercial and economic side very quickly too, and the operational side, of course. But my point is, it was exposure to the people around me, the water cooler talk, the random hallway conversations, the ability to bump into them, imitate them, adopt the things I like, reject the things I didn't, make judgments, gossip, discuss, meet, hang out after work, see how
Hmm.
they do things, get in trouble. These were all things that happened. The experience with the gear itself, there was something tangible about it. It wasn't just an abstract login prompt. I could see the piece of equipment that I was logging into. I could touch it. I could rewire the machine room in the middle of the day, to many dial-up customers' chagrin. I could touch CSU, DSUs. I could touch cross-connect cables. I could twist the coax on the DS3. That gave this isn't just an aesthetic thing. It gave it a certain metaphysical standing to what I was doing when I logged into the device. And I worry that starting out in this field now is like in a lot of other fields. It's just, here's a Slack channel and a couple logins,
Hmm.
and ask AI if you don't if you're confused. Good luck. That's not learning. And I don't think that these remote collaboration tools, no matter how much they've matured over time, can replace the importance of human contact, which is not to say I'm not trying to go on the record and say that I oppose remote work. I've been the beneficiary of remote work for almost my entire adult life. It's afforded me
Hmm.
unparalleled flexibility and many exhilarating opportunities. I'm hardly saying that, but the entire culture of, so to speak, educating new cadres for the future, I think has collapsed, and I don't recognize any of my learning process and how the kids are doing this now, even with the benefit of all these collaboration tools and screen sharing and chat apps and so on. Um, I wonder how I would have learned the intangible, the sort of ethereal, difficult to pin down and describe, but really, really important parts of the judgments that I make on an everyday basis now without having that human element and that connection. And that's not to say that that human element had the same centrality across all jobs or anything.
Hmm.
Maybe it was just a time and place in life thing. Maybe my first ISP job, which is one of 6 that I held, just attracted especially interesting or especially pedagogically gifted people. It's hard to say. But there's something missing in our atomization now. And I think that doesn't maybe bear on telecom specifically, but I wonder how the next generation is going to learn. And when I deal with younger people in telephony, or more likely they're just IT people for whom the telephony has fallen in their lap by some technical decision or another management decision, I see that they don't really have the same or depth of organic knowledge acquisition that we had just by constant proximity to the physical manifestation of what we're doing. It's all in the cloud now. You can't touch it, you can't see it, you don't know how it works, you don't make these types of mental leaps. Am I just yelling at clouds? Is it possible that they navigate these abstractions much more fluently? Maybe.
Hmm.
But I see some signs that some of the some of the ways of transmitting tribal knowledge and folklore, which I think doesn't get enough press here, have really broken down. I would choose telecom again, absolutely. I think
Good.
my interest in communication and networking, uh, I would like to think that if I spawned at a slightly different place in the timeline, it would still be there. There's something, maybe it goes back to being an immigrant. Maybe it goes back to making an intercultural and linguistic leap of that size at a young age, but something about bringing the world closer and connecting people and connecting and sending and receiving information and pressing a key here and having something happen there is just indelibly fascinating to me in a way that I would think is timeless and to which telecom most gives expression.
Yeah, I have a very similar opinion. I like to romanticize kind of the work that we do here and trying to make us more personal communicators as we as a society kind of move to be less personable. When we have interactions like this, how is it that we can feel as though we're at the water cooler talk? How do we get the best of both worlds to have like the flexibility in our schedule while also having an intimate relationship with a mentor like that, where you can just stumble and crash into them.
I don't have a great answer, and not that you're necessarily asking, but I don't have a great
Yeah.
answer because um, I think traditional kind of Silicon Valley technocracy thinking styles this as just a problem of insufficient technology or tooling or code or something, when in fact
Hmm.
these are somewhat more timeless human and maybe even political problems, in any case, social problems. I don't think they're so easily rectified by just having better collaboration tools. Better collaboration tools help. I have never
Hmm.
felt closer to more people than, than this whole combinatoric explosion of remote communication during the pandemic, this watershed moment where everything became a video call for real now instead of being a, Skype style postage stamp. This happened. So
Uh-huh.
it does bridge gaps, but I don't know that I could become a I don't know that my acculturation and maturation as a professional could have proceeded at the pace it did and with the same fruits that it did if my medium was Zoom calls. Because you
Hmm.
got to, I mean, think about it. Every single remote interaction you have, even if it's just, Slack channel for BSing, is in some way a directed, intentional, communication graph traversal. You have to reach out, you have to send that message, you have to type that keystroke. You don't just bump into people. Um, you have to have a reason for contacting anybody to say
Oh
anything.
yeah. Hmm.
And I don't learn that way. Maybe I'm just a very extroverted person, but I don't really learn that way. I need those idle moments, and I need that proximity in order to exploit gaps in what's happening throughout the day and ask people questions and learn from them. I just don't see how you do that over a Zoom call. I don't see how you do it over Slack. I don't see how you do it over this portfolio of tools that we have.
Yeah, and that's our journey to accept. That's our mission, I guess, moving forward into the new
Yeah.
world that we're at. And I think we're doing it. I think if anyone is with your seasoning and VoIP and some of the projects that we see roll out, I think it's really encouraging, and we can see the light that we are moving towards a world like that, and hopefully we can just make the most out of it.
Yeah, there's no putting the milk back in the cow. We're going we're
Exactly.
one way or the arc of history kind of goes that way, and so I agree that we're on the leading edge of discovering how to adapt to this new reality, and maybe part of adapting to it is realizing that some parts of it have gone too far. I don't know, but um, I agree that as practitioners of what we do, are more there than most folks who are just along for the ride, and who are now, who are a payroll analyst too, except they're sitting on Zoom calls all day now. I think that we are maybe fortunate in a sense to be in a position of helping influence and modulate what these experiences will be like, and crafting more and more novel technological answers to these questions. How to make it more immersive, how to make telepresence more real, how to connect us even though we are now in geographically disparate teams. I think that we are probably at the forefront of providing those kinds of answers. Personally, I always tell people I'm a plumber. I mean, well,
Yeah.
my specialization is really in SIP service delivery, infrastructure glue. It may have business logic. There's a development heavy element to it, of course, but at the end of the day, I'm not really present in most of the value creation that happens up the stack, and I'm both conscious and self-conscious about that. I have made a business model out of not doing that stuff precisely because, my customers have a very occasional need for high expertise plumbing, and that's what I do.
Hmm.
But still,
Yeah.
in some way, I feel very tuned into what they're doing, and I have the unique fortune as a consultant to observe what dozens, maybe even hundreds of companies are doing, and that does give one a vantage point in the sense of how this is all propelling forward.
Hmm. No, well, Alex, I think you showed a great story on, how curiosity is able to lead us to new adventures, new innovations, as well as the importance on mentorship and, just a good message on either be one or learn from one. Is there anything else that I've yet to ask, or topics we should discuss before we reach the end here?
I can say that in terms of personal applications of VoIP, one of the most meaningful things I ever did was in 2012, I went to Yerevan, Armenia, where I have family on my mother's side, and I brought my almost 80-year-old grandmother a Polycom phone and gave her a local Georgia DID, and it completely changed her life. She was able to be on the phone with my mom in a way that she understood, in a way that was intelligible to her
Hmm.
technologically, for hours for free. And that was probably one of the more gratifying experiences in my life in terms of
Yeah.
thinking about, well, how does this cash out to a bottom line for me? What do I do? How does this impact other people in my life?
Yeah. And that's the whole purpose, making sure that what we're doing is we're doing it for the good and the benefit of the world. We didn't come this far to just come this far, but being able to empower things that are close to us or that we actually care about, and then seeing them actually enabled into the world, is a pretty special thing. So, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Definitely.